Sheena Patel is a young writer. She was born and raised in northwest London, as we can read in her biography. And she has been working in the art world as a writer and an assistant in film and TV industries. And she wrote a very interesting and clever first novel. They said it's a brilliant and brutal first novel, which is called I'm a Fan. This is the title. And it's very interesting because it shows you what happens to our personal relationships in the digital age, in the age of the social networks and so on. It shows very well how this new world in some ways changes the way we perceive ourselves and we perceive others. So the English title is I'm a Fan. I would start from this because the Italian title is slightly different. It's called Io ti seguo. It will be published, it is published by Edizioni Atlantide. The concept is the same, but the idea of fandom is quite strong. Why did you start with the fandom, or did fandom came at the end of the writing process? It was the beginning or the end?
It was the beginning. Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction. That was really lovely. No, it was the beginning because I was watching. Well, it was because of the government. I mean, how many governments have the UK had in the last 5 years? But with Boris Johnson's government, I was thinking we had that in tandem with Trump coming into power. And I watched the attacks on the Capitol, and that sort of call and response between this mass mob and Trump. And I mean, from watching the trials, you know that they weren't directly in contact, but they were using media to communicate with each other. So if Trump said, call off the attacks, they'd stop. And that was very frightening to me. And him just saying, you know, come march on the Capitol, and they went. And they didn't stop until he told them to stop. And I found that in lockdown, which the winter lockdown was absolutely horrifying. The atmosphere was just stultifying. And seeing this beautiful sunlit White House, there was this, very almost like green screen. It was this Windows, sort of computer generated background almost, but it was real. And him stood like kind of very posed saying, I love you. Whatever, the thing that he said, I found so chilling. You're very special. I love you. And I thought, this is not democracy. This is not a democracy. We are not operating in a democratic space. With Boris Johnson, there was intense fandom in the press and around him. And I was just thinking, what is it about fandom? And, with social media, this idea of collecting followers and numerically being sort of been judged as worthy or not worthy, as a voice of being important if you have a lot of followers, and how that's not very accurate at all. Sometimes the people with the biggest amount of followers just need to shut up, like they're bought off because they're sponsored by, you see captions of like, I've always wanted to use this shave, it's key to my identity to have a shaving cream like this or something. And you're like, what are you actually even talking about? There's nothing real here. And it's this idea of like using identity representation, like representation politics, ads, money, followers, fandom, politics, protection, being visible, invisible, how institutions, mistreat you. Very weirdly, I found it very strange, the stuff around the Queen, her dying and the funeral, because in the same week, a boy called Chris Saber was shot by the police in the same week, like a couple of days before. And you just see the way these institutions treat two different bodies, one an old white woman and another a young black boy, and how the same institutions treated these two bodies very, very differently. And I just put it all together and wrote a book.
But you made a very clear statement about the political situation. But how does this great overview fits into personal lives, because your novel talks about people, about real people, about a young girl, about a man she's in love with, about other women, about her mother, and so on. How does this big frame that you told us about fits into our personal lives, our personal relationships?
Well, I watched a lot. So, I mean, I love Adam Curtis. He's he's like a real BBC, like old school BBC maverick, and he sort of like the myth is that he lives in the basements of the BBC and he has access to all of these archives. And I've watched his films for like years, but I watched his he's got a bunch of new ones coming out, but I watched Can't Get You Out of My Head. I mean, it's about 10 hours, and in lockdown I watched it maybe like 4 times. It's just terrifying. But I love the way he goes, and also Exterminate All the Brutes by Raoul Peck. I watched that. It's like a documentary essay, sort of personal essay that moves through colonialism and history and his life and films. And I'm very influenced by films. Like I work as an AD, as an assistant director. I'm not a director, I'm an AD, so I like facilitate directors and run the floor. So that's idea of like big stories being told through personal, like through one story, these big ideas. And especially Adam Curtis uses, to kind of talks about communism, but then we'll focus on one person and we'll tell you the history of that country through that one person's life. And, we're all, I guess, threads of history in a way, all living in the world, sort of absorbing what's happening around us, and then within this frame of history. And I thought, what better way to tell a story than, how else do you tell these big stories is through these small moments. And yeah, I don't know, I didn't really choose anything. It just sort of happened, which makes me sound like an idiot, but like it just sort of, the story happened and I just was very associative in the sense of like, oh, I think I should put her here, or this should happen to her, or maybe that thought is related to that thing. And it was very, very sprawling writing it, and then the editing process was trying to find the story, but I didn't have a plan, basically. I just wrote.
And what happens is that a young woman gets in love in some ways with the wrong man, with the wrong man. How could that happen?
Doesn't it happen? It's a very ordinary story, isn't it? People fall in love with the wrong person all the time. And what I wanted to, well, the way that I wanted to the structure of the story, I mean, it was very, very wide. And then me and the editor was just sort of like, no, it has to be these 3-4 characters and everything else has to just sort of disappear. But I mean, it's very ordinary to fall in love with someone that's unavailable. It's the most ordinary story in the world, and it causes immense pain. It's this great opera in your life. And it happens all the time. I mean, I've had girls writing into me saying, oh, I'm like in a situation like this. And I think that's the patriarchy, in the sense of like women are taught to, in that sense of like being very broad and stereotypical, but women are taught to treat men very like trophies or prizes, and that you don't have any value until you have one. And men are taught that they have unlimited choice and that they can choose. And that sort of battle between female sexuality, male power, is quite epic, isn't it? It's forever. And how does that play in this with new technology? And it happens all the time. Like you get very, very, you see, sometimes you'll look at a picture of someone, you're like, you're in love with him, like he has this power over you. But it happens, and someone's withholding and you want something. And then I was trying to relate that to like trauma of like society, of how society can be indifferent to you, and how you're sort of primed for these relationships where bodies are currency and access becomes sort of a key to ease, and how the idea of ease in your life is quite political. And the man who has a lot of power, how he becomes sort of the key to her wanting an easier life. And it's not just about falling in love with him. You know, she's as manipulative as he is in a way, and that's what I wanted to show, is that there's no victim. I didn't want her to be a victim. Anything that he did to her, she did to someone else, and she is trying to get something out of him just as he's getting something out of her. And I think, you know, how these relationships then become transactional, and how that is mirrored in social media, where it's like, I'm going to do this for a little bit of this so I can get that. I will give up this thing about myself in order that I can gain some other thing. And that's it's very ordinary. There's nothing spectacular about that, I think.
And she is a fan of this man at the beginning, and she meets him, and there's a relationship between the two, between her and the man I want to be with. And at a certain moment, she says that he is spoiled by his fans. What do you mean by that?
He's spoiled by his fans, but again, it's that idea that when you have cultural power and seemingly endless choice, and everyone wants you, then that's very easy. You know, then he creates the same sort of environment romantically for himself, where he chooses who he wants when he wants them, and gives them a little bit and runs away again. And that sort of kind of tease of being close but not close becomes sort of endemic to all of the relationships. So if everybody wants you, it becomes very easy to sort of act in a very imperial way. And then I wanted to sort of look at him through the idea of like almost England, and how this other woman who the narrator is very fixated on the internet, who's one of the rivals, how she then becomes, so everyone almost becomes an archetype or a symbol. So he's like male, white, patriarchal power. The woman is, you know, white, female, kind of influencer power. And she's the narrator, just this shadowy person on the edges. And I mean, we are all that shadowy person on the edges, looking at somebody else's very, very Instagrammable life, like wanting what they're showing, and how actually social media feels democratic but isn't, because you have access to everything, but you, in the sense that you can see it but you don't, because you're not in it. So it's that weird inside outside. And then you feel, you know, I know this is sort of a segue, but you find, you know, very, very public influencers having public relationships, and then suddenly they're not together anymore, and they don't explain why they're not together. And there is this certain right you feel to know, I was witness to your entire relationship. Now I demand the answers to why you broke up. Like, I need to have a statement from the both of you. And it's that sort of ownership, which is quite dark, I think, because these are people you don't know. You see the most intimate moment, you know, you'll see them first thing in the morning, and then watch the entire stretch of their relationship. And then you feel a right to know certain things about them. And I was just like, this is quite dark.
Yes, you talked about one of the big characters of your novel. That's what you call the woman I am obsessed with, which is a rival, the white woman who is one of the lovers of the wrong man. And these two people are completely different from the main character. They're white, they're rich, they are very popular on the net, and so on. Why does she desire these people to be like these people? And the other very strange thing is that Googling people and following them on Instagram or on Facebook or wherever is the same thing. If you love the other person, and if you hate it.
You hate them. But then I think love and hate are almost the same, aren't they? It's the same intensity. It's indifference, that's the opposite to those things. Like love and hate are like half sisters almost. But yeah, that's actually very true, that if you both love and hate something, it's the same behavior, so that's why it feels like the same. Well, I think there's, again, she's this archetype of, again, ease, access, and how inequality is perpetrated through a lifetime, through this life, of being born in this particular circle, having access to social media, having a life that fits the aesthetic of that social media, then sort of being leveled up to this place of being envied, and how like shit it is, really. It's just really boring. It's a very boring thing to be talked down to like that, I think. And so this was sort of a revenge story to the narrative that's on social media. It's like, actually, it's not that thing, it's this thing, it's not how you're portraying yourself isn't really how things are. And how social media becomes this, though I love it. I mean, Instagram's given me so much, because it's allowed me to make friends and a network, and like I've sort of turned myself into a writer. I never really thought of myself as one, and I just used it as a place to meet people and then meet them in real life and create a network. So I'm not here like thinking I'm better than Instagram, because I'm not. And it's also been a very much like TikTok is at the minute. It was for 10 years at the forefront of like trend setting and culture, in the way that pop music was, I guess, like a few decades ago. But I just think there's just a veneer of fakeness that it started to really annoy me. So I just created a character that spoke back to all of it, really.
And how does being on social networks changes our identities? Starting from your nickname on Instagram, which is
my nickname.
Yeah,
which is
I might be.
I might be. Oh, my handle.
Sheena Patel. Something happens if you don't know who you are, or if you don't want us to know who you are.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, I mean, that is a very, very old name. I haven't even thought about that. That was like, how long have I had Instagram? Maybe 5 years I've had Instagram. Hi, is it for 5? No, 7. Well, in the book, no one has a name, and you mentioned that in the email. You've really thrown me with that question, but so no one has a name, and I find that idea of like not knowing who you are, in the sense of like, names are very possessive, aren't they? Like, the man I want to be with, the woman I'm obsessed with, in a way that's to control them. It's to take away their identity so that it becomes easier to hate them. And again, and people do that all the time by stripping things out, the complexity out of things, in order to either hate or love it and make it 2D. And that's kind of the double edge of fandom, because they feel almost the same. Because like you say, hate and love feel the same. And that obsessive love can feel like hate. And when that love flips and turns into jealousy and goes into those more darker feelings, it can be very, very scary. So that's why they're not named, and why she doesn't have a name. Because as much as she's saying she loves this person, I think not using anyone's name means that she's almost as unavailable as everybody else that's present in the story. And my Instagram handle is I might be Sheena Patel, because I think at the time I didn't know who I was either. Like, what is the potential of you as a person? And can you even live up to the sense of your own name? Or there was more like negative space in that. And I find negative space very interesting as an idea, which is why the chapters are so, I mean, they're not even chapters, but they're just sort of scenes. I wanted them to have a lot of white space around it. So the words almost like suspended on the page in a sort of art way.
Well, art is very important. Art is very important in your novel. Your characters often go to art shows. She hates Pina Bausch, which I love a lot. Why is it?
Why do you like that?
Marina Abramovich, but she hates Pina Bausch.
Yeah. Why do you find that interesting?
Well, because I think that visual arts in this moment can help us to find a center with our bodies that social networks don't allow.
Yeah, it's very true, and that's why art is there. Is and the art? Well, one, because art is very art reviews are very hierarchical and inaccessible, and you need to have all of these qualifications. And I thought, fuck it, I'm just gonna write an art review and see how that happens. So, and I was like, I don't have any of the cultural art historical language around it, but I know what it feels like in my body. And then that became actually this sort of disembodied, disassociated state of obsessive stalking was countered then by this very embodied experience of art, these very centered experiences of art, and how you consume media, essentially, if you think about art like that. But Peter Bausch I find very, very fucking hard. I find it excruciating. Like I watched it recently and I was like, oh my god, I want this to end. Like it's just so slow and nothing happens. I was just like,
okay, next time we will talk a lot about Pina Bausch, but I have other questions about your novel.
What I do love is all of the modern dress, and I love that. And but there's some, I don't know whether it's like maybe it's a time thing. And I find the men and women, that battle between men and women, fascinating. The dance between men and women in those, and I know how shocking that must have been to see. You know, not to have all these tutus and these very like Renaissance sort of dynamics. It must have been very modern and fresh. But maybe we've gone over her. She was very, very pioneering when she came out. I mean, it must have been mind blowing. And now we know this. So it feels almost archaic now. But the Marina Abramovich, I found that idea of crowd, because it's a Rhythm Zero where she has all these objects laid out, and she kind of gives herself to the audience. And I found that mirrored what the narrator does in the book, which is that she sort of, an objectification was something I wanted to explore. Like the narrator objectifies herself, she objectifies the man and the woman. Art is discussed. They're quite transactional, capitalistic things. Things to buy and sell. So objectification was quite important to sort of explore in a hidden way. Also, objects are the things that are sort of lusted after on the internet. Like, if you have these things, you will be happy, which is like the key to capitalism, and what social media sort of prolificates, in the sense of, like, you've even got a shopping button now. So it's like, oh, if you like this, you can buy it here. It's very bald in the way it tries to sell you happiness, even if it's like, oh, we're all being very authentic on the internet. But I just find it's all very mixed and weird.
Well, it's a way you build your identity, buying objects, buying things, and that's what the woman I am obsessed with teaches to the people. You can, yes. If you buy these things, your identity will change, and you will become like
me. Yes, exactly, and how that is just blatantly not true, but so seductive. And how that's been, instead of ads and billboards selling you things, now you've got people who look like your friends, or people that you feel like you can have direct contact with, selling you things. And it was just very odd. And I found that exploration of objects and what you surround yourself with, and this idea of like talking about Argos. I mean, I don't know, you probably don't, but like shops that on the high street, almost like Tesco, which is our supermarket, one of our supermarket brands, and Argos, which is like a shop that you have, there's a magazine, very old-fashioned, you have like a magazine of like a big thick directory of things that you can just order and pick up, and how that sort of tells other people where you are in the class structure of the UK, which I don't know. I hope that translates to Italian. I hope that works. But it's just very, very specific to the UK, and more specific to London, and how there's this aesthetic on the internet that seems to be without any borders, that it's called travels, and and how that becomes the thing that you want, and you're not sure you want it, but it shows other people that you're doing well. So you want to show other people you're doing well, so you buy the objects. And it's like, where and which and how are you being authentic to yourself? How do you break out of the taste band that you've been brought up in order to like graduate to be somebody rich, if that's what you want, and what that does to you inside?
And this is what people show, what people want to show to other people. But there's another aspect which is very interesting. At a certain moment, the character in the book says, I don't want to show some parts of me. I want to hide some parts of me from my parents, from other people. How can we keep for ourselves some parts of our identity when everything goes on social media, when you can Google people, when you can follow them on social networks and so on? How can you keep a privacy area in your life? Is it possible? Can you do it?
I'm not sure. I don't, but privacy, we seem to have given up any sense of privacy. We don't care. Do we care? If there's any, and I think, but what's funny is that this book was made very privately. He didn't tell anyone about it for about 9 months. No one knew apart from Nina, who is the publisher at Rough Trade Books, and Will, who's the editor. I told no one in my life. Whenever anyone asked me what I was doing, I said nothing. And I just felt like I had to keep it very, very private. And when I've told people that, they found that quite shocking. Like, why didn't you tell? And then you see on Instagram people who are writers kind of posting like, oh, I've given in my first draft, I've done this, I've done that. And I'm like, for me, that was a very, very private, secret process. And the only time I announced it when I was like, oh, there's a book coming out and it's coming out on this date, and it was pretty much done. But I didn't tell people in my life for about 9 months. So yes, it's possible to keep things private, but do we want to keep things private? Probably not. And maybe Instagram's just become like Facebook, in that it will be out of date in a few years and it won't really matter.
Can you tell me something about For Black Girls Who Write? What is that experience? Because we don't know much about that in Italy.
So it's for brown girls.
Yeah.
For brown girls who write. Well, it's a collective I'm a part of, and we started in 2017. So I got a lot of my friends together, like 20 of my friends, on my friend's boat, and asked them all to bring something to read, because there was quite a few of them writing. So I said, bring your thing in to read, and we'll read to each other, because we've never done that together before. So we did that, and the 3 other girls that were there are all from like different types of Indian heritage, but and I didn't have many Indian female friends at that point, and I just thought we should stay together, or just create something together. So we got in a WhatsApp. I started a WhatsApp group and called it For Brown Girls Who Write, and we didn't know quite what to do with each other, but we wanted to do something. And I think in the face of a publishing industry that felt very remote and very white and probably very disinterested in us, within a system that we just didn't understand how it worked. Like, we didn't know what an agent was, and the kind of different ways that people need ideas presented. Like, I still don't know how to do that. Whatever it is that you need to do to get a book published, I don't know how to do that, because Will and Nina would just like, write something and we'll publish it. It was very open, and nothing about the market was considered at all about it. It was just like, we're just going to put something out there. We believe in it, and that's all that matters. So we published a couple of things together, and the most recent was in 2020. We did a book of pamphlets, so we had one each, and it was just all poetry, and mine was prose. It was like a long form poetry prose thing. it was more about finding community and believing in each other and sort of solidarity. Basically, we formed a union and listened to each other and give feedback and support one another. But everyone's lives have got very busy recently, so we haven't got a project that we're heading towards. But and we've been together like 5 years, but for the first up bar last year, like we took a show to Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019. Then the pandemic has really people's lives have like sort of kind of really realigned, but we're still there for each other. It's still like a place for friendship and support. So it's really beautiful to have that.
And if you have to give some advice to a young woman like you who thinks, I want to write a book, I want to write a novel, what could you tell her?
I would say just write. You have to write. And if you can, do what I did, which is don't ask for permission from anyone. Just do it and find your own community and create your own scene, create your own sense of space and an orbit, some sort of gravity around what you're doing. And people, if it's good, people will come to you and you will get better. Because like if I look at what I first started to write, I'm like, but you'll get better. And you just sort of, once you have other people being like, I believe in your work, you just need one other person to say that they believe in what you're writing. It becomes much easier to carry on. But I think I find writing a very community exercise. I write for it to show other people. Almost immediately, I would just share things and send things around. Apart from the book, but once I've got to a comfortable place with that, I shared it to all my friends, and I wanted their feedback. I wanted their input. Like people I trust, that they're people I trust. So I valued what they said, and I find that reaching out and not keeping it secret and not keeping it, to a degree, yes, because you have to create in a private place. But as soon as you're comfortable with it, get it out there and get eyes on it. And but I just say sit down. There's literally no barrier to it other than you sitting down and writing, and not to judge too much. Like not to say, oh, this is rubbish. Sometimes things take a while to become what they become, and to be patient with that. Be patient with yourself. Be able to withstand your mistakes and be able to withstand that it will be shit for a bit, but it will get better, and that more of you is better for it, not less, more.
And do you listen to what other people tell you about your writing? Did you change your book because someone told you something that you thought it was right, or
well, I sent it to 2 writers, a very early draft to 2 writers, and one of them told me something that my editor had been telling me, but I'd been really fighting him. And once he said it, I was like, oh, okay, oh well, I'll do it. and then I told my editor, I was like, I'm doing the thing. And he was like, why have you been fighting me for months? And I was like, I didn't believe you. And so I'm very stubborn, so I don't listen. But then, I don't know, I'll listen to the second person. But there was a couple of things, like one of my friends was like, oh, this character's name is not like, it's an Iranian name. And she said, she was like, it's not the right kind of, you need to change the name. So I changed the name. But there would be, I just more wanted to get a sense, because I wanted the book to scare people. I wanted it to make people feel quite sick. I didn't want the book to feel like this safe space to tell everybody how good you are and how great it is to, be brown in a white society, and how crap racism is. And, we know all of that. We know that story. I wanted to tell something new, and I wanted to frighten people. And so when one of my friends very early on, she was the only person I sent it to early on, was like, this made me feel a bit sick. I was like, yes. I was like, I did it. And then it was more me, the editor. I'd listen to him because he's amazing. But I didn't really change anything, because I was like, what my editor gave me was permission to be fully myself. And like the titles are very flippant, and
The titles of the
jokes.
chapters.
Yeah, of the chapters. There, and I was talking about it. I can't remember who I was saying it to, but it was almost like I was taking. I'm going to use bad language, but like, taking the piss out of this grand idea of writing a book by writing these very flippant jokes, and even the seriousness of the chapters. I thought it's kind of funny to have the chapters have nothing to do with what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to teach anyone anything. I'm just sort of here being like a clown. But I like that idea of taking something very, very seriously, like taking these ideas very, very seriously, but also showing a sort of level of awareness that she is in this situation that is very, very bad, but also the jokes tell you that she's also aware of where she is and what she's doing. There's an awareness there that she's not this destructive person. She's also aware of what she's doing. And I think that awareness reminds you that you're in a book. You're not in the truth, you're in the presentation of the truth. And also I wanted, a lot of them are from memes. And I think when you're in a very depressed place, memes can become a massive lifeline for you. And also we're in a very, very odd political time where sometimes memes are the only way that you can really take in information, because information straight on is too intense. It's too overwhelming. So you need the joke to soften it a little bit, to protect yourself. So I sort of wanted to mirror that too, is to make people laugh as well as kind of frighten the hell out of them.
And it's also a way in which the character deals with her vulnerability, which is another great theme of the book. The vulnerability of the different characters. They are all vulnerable. We are all vulnerable.
Yeah. And also how, yes, and also the not naming them protects her from being vulnerable. Not naming them means they are not very vulnerable to her. But then it also shows you how trapped everybody is within a system that demands you be vulnerable, but you're this unbearable to be that vulnerable to other people. Because it is, I think, actually, it's the hardest thing, I think, in life is to be truly vulnerable. And not in that sense of like talking about your life in this very, it's not telling the story of a trauma. It's being in the more quiet place of the pain. I think that's and not being reactive in that. I think that's true vulnerability. And I think that's actually really hard to achieve with another person or with other people, is not to, I mean, I am talking at you right now, but like not talking at people about the pain you've suffered, but like truly embodying the hurt, I think is very, very hard to do, and is not something you're ever taught, and it's something you learn over the course of your life. But then also how vulnerability becomes this thing that is commodified. The story structure that we're taught to tell as brown and black people, especially definitely in the UK, is to tell the story of your pain. And if you tell the story of your pain, you will get the book deal, you'll get the place on stage, you'll get the speech, the talk at the festival. Something like this is very, it's like I'll tell the story of my pain and of how terrible it is to be a brown person in this white society, and how I'm displaced and I don't know where I belong. You tell that story, which is a story we all tell in different guises. We tell that story, then you will get a little bit of what you want. You'll get a little bit of status. You'll be able to sit above everybody else. You'll be protected in that sense of that people know your name. And what does that do to you to do that, to tell that story, to give up something of yourself to tell that story? And it seems to be the only story that's available to us. And what I wanted with this book, I don't know if I was successful, but what I wanted to do with this book was to complicate that story and to make it not a story about race in the sense of like, I'm going to teach you about racism and how racism is bad and how I'm actually a real person because I feel pain. It was there to be like, fuck you, I'm coming for you. Like, I'm going to attack you. That the system has poisoned me this much that I'm going to wreak revenge or do something very, very strange because it's madness to be in this system that demands so much and gives so little. And then that then became a mirror between the relationship between the narrator and the man, which is that he became the society and she became, you know, somebody trying to get something out of him / the society. And if she thinks that this white woman, this rich white woman, if she was more like her, then he would want her, she would have more access, she would be more desirable. So yeah, I was just thinking about it. It took me a long time to like nail that idea down. It took me almost a year because I was trying to get to the heart of something, but also tell it as a joke. Also tell it with a bit of humor and energy rather than a lesson. It was just the vitriol of it I was trying to get across. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheena Patel. I'm a fan. Io ti seguo, Edizioni Atlantide.
Thank you for having me.